dead. All the living shall fear the dead. All the living shall fear the dead. Do you ever wonder if it hurts? So how
Hello everybody, welcome and welcome back. I wanted to go over our Blade of Namira build. So for anybody that's been watching the streams, we've been building this character up over the last, I'd say, 60 hours or so. I wanted to share how the build functions, where we're at now, and some revisions at the end, because I think we could actually eke out more power and make some of the in-game bosses a little bit more manageable. But to start, the premise of the build is essentially we are a worshipper of Namira. This provides us a lot of access to poison resistance decreases on our enemies, and through that we use our poison daggers to not only deal massive amounts of burst damage through physical attacks, but also whittle them down by applying several dots of poison. The race I chose to go with the Red Guard, several reasons for that. You get a bonus in one-handed at the start, just to get some extra extra attribute points there. You start with quite a lot of stamina. I believe it's 150 stamina. You have less sprinting costs. I think it's one stamina less per second to sprint. And you'll see at the end game, we actually don't use any stamina at all while we're sprinting, which is nice, because essentially what this is a hit and run sort of, I want to say, almost ninja or assassin like build. However, we're not using any stealth. We're purely using speed, power, and poison damage. Now for our Birthsign, this is something I might recommend a change for, but as for now, this build we took the mage. The reason for that is it gave us extra spell power, 10% at the start, 20% at the end once you reach 100 in a magic skill. Oh, our guy just decided to walk off. He's pondering. So we get at level 100 in a magic skill, you get 20% bonus spell power and an extra 150 magicka at the start. This was to offset the fact that this Red Guard is not in any way inclined to magic, but having that extra magical pool allowed us to cast several other buffs that we use during combat. As you can see now at endgame, with everything that we've gotten, we're sitting at 725 magicka. And once we enter into combat, our greater fortify attributes kicks in, and we're sitting somewhere closer to 815 magicka, which allows us to pretty much cast anything that we would want. Some recommendations for maybe some changes: you could do something like the lady, to give you more passive regen for your health and stamina if you're not really looking to use spells all that much. Or you could also use perhaps the warrior just to get flat damage. As far as traits go, now traits are something that are exclusive to LORERIM for the most part. If it's using the Biggie trait system, we chose Gambler. First of all, I think this is definitely a must on this build. We're using one-handed daggers, so you gain 50% increased critical hit chance However, your overall weapon damage is reduced by 25%. If you're using something like daggers or swords, the increase to critical hit chance far outweighs your reduction in weapon damage because you're just attacking so often and so quickly that you're going to be critting almost every attack. Especially with daggers, you already have some inbuilt crit hit chance in that perk tree. Your crit, you'll see in the top left of your screen, it'll be saying critical hit all the time. We also got Adrenaline Rush. This is something I would probably not recommend next time. It's good early game, so when you're at 20%, less than 20% health, you move faster, and you gain more stamina. So basically, this just lets you get out of jail, not free, but if you're really getting hurt, you can, dip behind a wall, rebuff up, heal up, and get back into the fight. Maybe some traits that I would take over that, such as you could take Witcher for increased poisons and potions, which I think once we talk about some of the revisions, I would make at the end. That might be my go-to choice. You could also take something like Jack of all spells. This decreases your master and expert level efficacy of those spells. However, your novice through adept is increased, and then through the majority of the game, those are the spells you're gonna be using. And I think even into the late game, there's some spells that still stick around. Something like Poison Cloak, we're using the entire game, and that's an adept level spell, and you would get 50% increased Poison Cloak damage. Deity, this goes without saying, we worship Namira. The reason for this is primarily for, if I can find it here, enemies within 40 feet of you have their poison resistance reduced depending on your favor. Now we're at almost max favor. We're at like 199% or something like that. You essentially, anyone near you gets 60% reduced poison resistance. Now this is going to play into some other things that we've chosen, specifically our Destiny skill tree. So if we come here to custom skills, we decided to take this line all the way up until we get to Rogue. Your attacks deal 50 poison damage over 10 seconds, which is awesome. They're having 60% less poison resist. Now we come down one. This is the real bread and butter. Power attacks reduce enemy poison resistance by 50% for 10 seconds. So effectively, we're always giving our enemies negative 110% poison resistance when we power attack them, which is all the time. Daggers cost almost nothing to power attack, so essentially the build flows as you're just going to sprint at something and then sprinting power attack it, and most enemies will die instantly. But let's say you're fighting a dragon, like you would have seen in the gameplay before. We're just going to spam power attacks, dodge behind it, spam power attacks, dodge behind it. So there's always an uptime on poison resistance decreases. And what this allows you to do is even enemies, let's say if we go to our bestiary here, even enemies like, here's Clockwork is a perfect example, just happen to be resistances. You see this poison bottle and it's got a yellow border on it. That means that these guys are immune to poison because they're robots, essentially automatons. That does not mean that they can never be poisoned. What it means is that their resistance is 100%. But when we attack them, they have 0% resistance. I don't think resistances can go negative, but they have 0% resistances. This allows us to poison everything in the game. It doesn't matter if it's a Draugr or a zombie, a skeleton, an automaton, even a poison dragon that may say that it's immune to poison. Nothing is immune to poison to this build. Get into the skill tree. Now our primary skills, of course, you're going to go one-handed. There's some changes I would make to this skill tree that we'll talk about later, but essentially what you want to do, you want your weapon mastery perks, just flat 40% damage. Arm spell casting is nice because you get 10% reduced spell cost when you have a spell in your left hand and a weapon in your right, which we'll do quite often. Flurry, just a flat 30% hit crit chance. Huge. We're doing Gambler. More crits, the better. Penetrating strikes, power attack, stamina cost reduction, and armor pen. Awesome. Sprinting power attacks have an additional 50% crit chance to hit. So you're almost always going to crit on a sprinting power attack, which we're going to do a lot, especially against mobs. Like if we're moving through a dungeon, you're just going to sprint, power attack, and just move from enemy to enemy. Powerful strike, 20% more power attack damage, and 10% crit hit chance. Yes, please. And then you're going to want these. This isn't the most important of nodes to grab, but it's still nice. Ultimately, you end up with 15% more crit hit chance, which, yes, we want. We don't sneak attack, so that portion's not important to us, but the 40% damage from behind, you can, in some instances, even without followers, get behind your enemies by dodging and using some slow time effects. So not always are we able to capitalize on that, but when we do, there's 40% is massive. Puncture is big for us. You want to get this point at this perk point as quickly as possible. You with daggers, you now do double crit damage, and you have an additional 25% crit hit chance. So for any of our little mathematicians out there, it sounds like we have 100% crit chance. It's not exactly how all the math works out. I think it comes out to something, someone did the math in the Discord, closer to like 80%. But still, we're critting almost all the time. Storm of Steel, this is actually something I might recommend not taking. It's not hugely useful for us. It's mostly used for bow builds to get the secondary dagger on their bow. But you do get 50% more dual wield power attack poise damage. Problem is we're using daggers, and it's not something we're not breaking poise all that often. So if you want to save a perk point, you could remove that. Evasion. You pretty much want to take everything. There's nothing really in this tree that's not important other than unarmored, because we are wearing light armor. Agility, this perk allows you to use light armor. Dodge is a must in third person, which is what we'll be playing in most of the time. We get a really nice and long dodge animation. Have to get this agile spell casting because we will be casting spells. And so when you're wearing light armor, you get no spell cost penalty. It's a really, really, really important perk point. It allows you to fight some of the tankier enemies more effectively, some of the more difficult enemies. So in the beginning, something like a Dwarven Centurion or a Giant, you don't want to get hit by them because they're going to ragdoll you. What this does is slows time by 50% for 30 seconds and drains 5 stamina per second while doing it. Which sounds like a lot, but fortunately with this build, in some circumstances, we lose no stamina at all while this is active. We have so much stamina regeneration. 50% chance to avoid damage, period, is amazing. Skills are Restoration. We use this to gain access to poison spells. So we'll talk more about the spells that we use later. But we want to go all in on Restoration. We want to grab the Venomancy to increase our poison damage and spell cost reduction on those. And then Paralyzing Poison. You reduce the target's poison resistance by 10%, but this doesn't really matter for us. We're already doing that anyway, past the 100% threshold. But also, you have a chance to paralyze with your poisons, which is nice. You'll just sometimes notice you're fighting somebody and they just fall to the floor. Improved healing and respite are super nice for... One, obviously you're getting improved healing, but respite, what we'll do is we'll throw on a greater healing aura, and we'll just have even more passive stamina regeneration while that's active. You obviously want to go all the way up to your master restoration spells. Focus Mind is nice because this build we do use Magicka, 50% Magicka regeneration. Power of Life and Essence of Life were two things I was testing out for some of the in-game boss fights. They essentially give you about 12 seconds of immunity. And then Essence of Life, you can do that 3 times per day. It can be good in a pinch, but I think they're more luxury perk points. I don't necessarily think you have to take them. Alteration, you want to go all the way to Master. With the perk points, Magic Resistance, you really, really want to get these as soon as you can to stop getting destroyed by mages and dragons and things like that. Improved Mage Armor gives us even more Mage Armor. Our base armor set does get us the armor cap of 750 armor or 75 damage reduction. Certain enemies can penetrate your armor with their weapons, and so you want to be overcapped so that you can mitigate that. So what this allows us to do is throw on an armor spell on top of our base armor, and so they've got to chew through that additional armor to really mess us up. Versatile armor, so while you either have your armor spell or a shield spell, which shield spells allow you to resist a certain elemental type, you take 20% less elemental damage and physical damage. And so this is just a flat 20% damage reduction from elements and physical damage while you have an armor spell up. It's really, really nice. Stability makes your alteration spells last 50% longer. This is really huge because we pretty much always have 2 to 3 alteration buffs up on us at a time. Metamagical Thesis, you get 10% spell cost reduction for all of your spells. Why not? And then Metamagical Empowerment, you get 10% magnitude and duration for all of your spells, which is basically power and duration. Lastly, this is sort of a nice to have, not necessary, but you have a 10% chance to absorb magic, which will just give you some magic back. But if you, honestly, this is more of just a luxury. You don't need to have this point. This would be nice if we were running something like the Atronach Stone instead. We would have a really, really high chance to absorb magic, but we are not. Put 40 points into smithing to grab these 2 perk points here. This basically just allows us to have bonus traits in our armor and weapons. So our bonus traits for our particular armor are, we are using Daedric armor, so that gives us something like an extra 24% magic resistance, which is really nice. Then we get weapon traits. I'm not exactly sure. We haven't actually unlocked the codex for our weapons, but if we go to weapons here, you see something like if you have Dragonbone weapons, you have an extra 10% armor piercing. Wayfarer, I would actually consider this a major skill, not a minor skill. But you want to get to 60 in this as soon as possible. 100 is not necessary, but it is going to be pretty good. So start here with Cheap Tricks. Just basically gives you carry weight and lockpicking. We don't really care about this. It just allows us to get into this part of the tree. At 25, you get 15% magic res and 150 armor rating. Just tankier. We love it. Solo, you get more regen on all of your attributes. At 60, you get 10% elemental resistances. And then at 100, you get a flat 10% damage increase. Alchemy here. So alchemy, I would say these 2 are huge, especially this one early game. So at level 10, you can go ahead and grab this perk point. This will allow your food buffs to last 50% longer, and they're going to be 50% stronger. So in the beginning of the game, when you're struggling to keep your stamina topped off or your magicka regening, this is just really, really nice to have. You're going to get huge value out of this. And even in the late game, when you're doing something like using combat reflexes to slow time, this is going to go into play on your stamina regeneration. Drunken Combat. These are really, really, really nice to pump your damage. So you're going to put 2 perk points into this. And what it does is you no longer have a blur on your screen when you consume alcohol. You regenerate 3 stamina per second while you're drunk, basically, and your weapon attacks do 20% more damage. Your speech. A lot of these are more luxury perks, nice to haves. These center around, reducing your shout cooldowns, increasing the power of your shouts, but 2 perk points I would say are mandatory. Let's say are this one, Lore of the Thuum, simply because it gives us access to the next perk point, but you get 10% reduction on your shouts. Here, Indomitable Force. Enemy shouts are 50% less effective to you. This is massive for your survivability. You'll notice if you start fighting Draugr or dragons or whatever, if they hit you with a frost breath or a fire breath, your health is just going to start tanking. This cuts that down by a lot. And then when you're fighting someone like Alduin or Miraak in the end game, I would say this is required. Change of scenery real quick. I almost forgot an extremely crucial part of the build. Thank you, sir. So our equipment. being that we're a poison build, whether you're applying it via your spells or via your crafted poisons, you want to make sure you have two unenchanted dagger, or at least one unenchanted dagger, so that way you can apply your poisons. So we've just got a standard Daedric dagger here. The enchantment you see here is actually just from our greater poison weapon spell. And then we've got Mehrunes Razor. In LORERIM, instead of instantly having a chance to instantly kill somebody, you have a chance to just, I think it's do like 10 times damage or something. So if you watch back some of the combat footage from the beginning of the video, you'll see like randomly there just be huge chunks of damage. That's because of Mehrunes Razor proccing. Armor. The Vision of a New Dawn set is probably the best light armor set in the game. You can get this by going and doing it's a creation club quest called the Cause. I believe you can go to the Hall of the Vigilant. Once it's destroyed, you'll find a body. One of the vigilants is on a table, and you'll get a letter on his body, basically asking you to investigate the Mythic Dawn. You follow that quest line all the way until you get to Red Scar Cavern. There will be a boss in front of an Oblivion Gate. You kill him and take his armor, and there you go. The Cuirass, you get a bunch of spell cost decreases on almost every school of magic. If you're Destruction build especially, 30% less is insane. Armor penetration with all of your weapons is increased by 156, which I think just comes out to 15.6% armor pen on your daggers. Let's see. Is there anything that's not the Cuirass here? The helmet. You get 100% regeneration on all of your attributes, plus 1 health per second, 2 magicka per second, and 3 stamina per second. Let's see, where are our gloves at? You get 100 more magicka. You take 35% less damage from spells that you absorb. And when you attack with this damage, you deal 10 fire damage that's unresistible. 70% flat fire reduction and more stamina recovery, because why not? Let's see, our jewelry. We did the Galder Amulet quest. Galder Amulet. So you don't lose any magic when you get hit. Your health is increased by 50. Magic increased by 50. Stamina is increased by 50. You get another absorb spells, deal 35% less to you. Yeah, most paralysis effects don't affect you. Most slowing effects don't affect you. The slowing and paralyzing's super beneficial for us because, we're going toe-to-toe melee with people. A lot of things are going to hit you. You don't want to get slowed and you don't want to get paralyzed. The part that's like really super mandatory is Ring of Namira. You do this by doing the Namira quest line, which you can start in Markarth by going to the Hall of the Dead. This ring allows you to feed on corpses, and that feeding on corpses is how we boost our favor all the way up to 200%. So once you get this ring, you're just going to want to eat every corpse that you can find until you've got your favor all the way to 200%, so you can get that poison resistance decrease. And then you also get actually we don't have it active right now, but when you eat a corpse, so right out of the bat, this ring gives you, I think, 200 stamina. But then when you eat a corpse, you get an extra 50 stamina and an extra 50 health. While technically not a part of our equipment, I'm going to go ahead and consider it equipment. Oh, let's let him scream real quick. Oh, sorry, shout. It's basically equipment the way that it's used for us. So you want to grab in the apprentice alteration line, there's Okado's recital. Basically what this does is whenever you enter combat, it will automatically cast spells for you without a spell cost. So anything that you can be held in one hand and is a buff, we basically want to throw on this. So what we ended up going with, we have 3 restoration skills that automatically get cast when we enter combat. The first one you're going to want to pick up is Tree Rings. This thing's crazy. You cast 10 layers of plant skin, each increasing your maximum health by 31 points, that gradually fall off over 264 seconds. Basically, as soon as you start combat, and if you're level 100 restoration, you've got 310 extra health. It's insane. Once you get to expert level in alteration, your Okados gets an additional buff that you can carry with it. So when we start combat, then you're going to want greater fortify attributes on stealth. When we enter combat, we get 87 points to health, magicka, and stamina for 330 seconds. Crazy stats. And then lastly, this one's a little bit of a flex spot. You could change something up here you might like better, but I decided to go with King's Heart. This is a master level spell. A holy spark slowly follows the caster for 120 seconds. When it is nearby, it fortifies most skills by 15% and heals you for 15 points per second. This thing is pretty slow, so it doesn't keep up with us really well, which is why I would say, if you want something else, go for it. But what I like about this is it basically keeps you in the fight while you're going through a dungeon. You really don't need to stop and heal yourself. Every time you start a fight, this thing's going to pop up on you, start healing you. And if it is sitting on you while you're in a fight, you're going to get 15% more damage, basically, with the skill increases. A little bit about the order of operations of what you would want to do when you're fighting somebody. So if I'm about to go into a dungeon, I'll do a couple things. Now that we're at level 100, we've got some cool spells. We've got God Form from the Restoration skill tree. We now regenerate. As long as we're at full health, we get 130 magicka per second. So basically, spell cost is a thing of the past. The next thing I'll pop on myself is I want a greater healing aura. It's going to give us passive health and stamina regeneration. Honestly, the stamina is the part we really care about. We can pop on a dragon hide. Dragon hide's going to overcap our armor by 300 and also give us 25% flat damage reduction. Titan Eyes. Now this is a spell some people may not like because it increases your character size by 50%. So you're huge, and sometimes it can be a little bit hard to see enemies. But this increases our physical damage by 20% and reduces our physical damage taken by 20%. Really, really big damage buff for us. And we're just so tanky to physical attacks while we have this up. Last but not least, right before I would go in, I would pop this poison cloak. It doesn't last very long, so I do it last. And pop your poison weapon, which we've already got on, and away you go. You're going to sprint around, and as you've seen in the combat footage, just annihilate everything. We killed Deathbrand without breaking a sweat. And then, food. Drink your alcohol. Get your stamina regen and get your weapon damage up. Now, what would I change if I had to go back in time? I would say when I initially started this build, I didn't want to have to deal with alchemy, so we went full bore into restoration to use poison spells. I don't think that that's really the way to go. You could still go fully into restoration, but I might take perk points away from, let's say, speech. We don't need to have 100 speech. And in one-handed, we don't necessarily even need to have 100 one-handed. We could stop at 75 for the perk points. You might lose a little bit of flat damage, but this build mainly revolves around crits. I think you can stay with the crits, lose a little bit of damage, and you'll be okay. What we want to reinvest those points in is to alchemy. One, you can get stronger poisons through the alchemy tree. The poisons last longer. But the poison damage from our build, the spells that we choose to use, just really aren't that strong for what we're doing. So, it's mainly a weapon-based build, and we are doing pretty substantial weapon damage. But the poisons are really kind of fall off, I think, towards the end game. So when you cast Greater Poison Weapon on your weapons, you're doing basically 1 damage per second additional poison damage, which you can stack poisons multiple times. It's really not that big of a deal, but we could get a lot better. We're also using Poison Cloak. That's 15 damage per second. Not too bad, but something a little bit more substantial would be nice. Now, even at level 1, you can go and find, something like a damage health potion or poison that does 100 health instantly. Now, if you've got your daggers equipped with some really, really beefed up, upgraded poisons that you've crafted, you can do really big burst damage, which I think is kind of required for some of the in-game boss fights, because if you take a really long time to kill them, you're just increasing your chances of failure. So I think that's what I would really do. Drop down your one-handed or your speech, go full into alchemy. Now, what perk points would I drop for that? Kind of mentioned before, you can drop some of the shout cooldowns. You don't necessarily need the smithing perks, um, at least not the weapon ones. I'd say the armor one's pretty nice. Um, you don't need flurry in the one-handed skill tree, the poise damage perk up here. And, you take away power of life in the restoration tree. You don't really need these two here. So all in all, you take all those perk points, you get enough back. You would get something like, I don't know, 7 to 10 perk points back, and you can just invest all those into your alchemy tree, get improved poisons, pump that skill up, and I think you'll really see your damage scale better there. Um, all that to say, too, if you didn't want to use Redguard and you really wanted to lean even more into the poison, you could choose a race like Argonian. Argonians get an innate increase to their alchemy. I think it's something like 10 or 20% increased effectiveness of their potions. Well, that'll about wrap it up, guys. Appreciate anybody that stuck around to the end. I know this video has run on a little bit long. Uh, Real quick, I want to make a couple of shout outs or thank yous. I've only really been active on the channel for the last 2 weeks or so, and we've already nearly hit 1,000 channel views, which I did not expect at all. Had a lot of people coming into the streams on YouTube and Twitch and chatting, and plenty of people leaving comments. Plenty of new subs. The LORERIM community has been super, super welcoming. Uh, Super pleasant to chat with, and so thanks, guys. I really appreciate it. It's my first time ever editing a video, so I hope it turned out okay and that you enjoyed. If you try out the build, you have some recommendations, please let me know in the comments. Leave a like, and until then, I'll see you guys next time. Peace.